The most powerful man in the city could buy anything he wanted. Yet on the coldest night of the year, he asked for the one thing money could never purchase: someone who would simply stay. Rain covered the windows of the massive Reed estate as Alexander Reed stepped through the front doors long after midnight. The mansion was silent, filled with expensive furniture, priceless artwork, and every symbol of success a person could imagine. But beneath the polished appearance of the white mafia boss known throughout the city, there was a loneliness that no one ever saw. At 40 years old, Alexander had built an empire through discipline, intelligence, and careful decisions. People respected him. People feared disappointing him. People admired his success. Yet almost no one knew the man who existed behind the reputation. That night, after a difficult week of endless meetings and exhausting responsibilities, Alexander sat alone in his private room while the city lights reflected against the glass walls. His doctor had recommended professional care and rest, which was how Olivia Bennett entered his life. Olivia was a 29-year-old black curvy nurse known for her patience, compassion, and ability to make people feel comfortable during their most difficult moments. Unlike everyone else around Alexander, she did not treat him like a legend or a man to impress. She treated him like a person. During her first evening caring for him, Olivia noticed something unusual. The man everyone described as untouchable seemed less interested in power than in finding a quiet moment without pressure. She checked his schedule, reviewed his care instructions, and prepared to leave after completing her responsibilities. "You should rest now," she said gently. "I will return tomorrow morning." Alexander looked toward the empty room after hearing those words. For a moment, the confident expression he showed the world disappeared. "Stay a little longer," he said quietly. Olivia paused near the doorway, surprised by the request. She had expected many things from a man like Alexander Reed, but not vulnerability. "Mr. Reed, you have an entire house full of people who work for you," she replied. "You are not alone." Alexander looked around the quiet room before answering. "That is the problem. There are always people around me, but very few people who are actually here." The words carried a weight that Olivia did not expect. She saw something beyond the wealth, the reputation, and the intimidating name attached to him. She saw someone who had spent years being surrounded by others while feeling completely unseen. The room became silent as rain continued falling outside. Olivia did not feel fear. She did not feel impressed by his position. She simply recognized a person who was asking for understanding. "I cannot accept payment for staying," she said calmly. "And I am not here because of your reputation." Alexander looked at her with genuine surprise. Almost everyone who entered his world wanted something from him: money, influence, opportunities. But Olivia was the first person in years who seemed completely uninterested in what he could provide. That moment changed something neither of them understood yet. The mafia boss who could purchase luxury, security, and success had finally encountered the one thing he could never buy: sincere human connection. And as the rain continued through the night, neither Alexander nor Olivia realized that this simple request would become the beginning of a journey that would transform both of their lives forever. The morning after that quiet night at the Reed estate arrived with a different kind of atmosphere. The rain had stopped, leaving the city covered in soft sunlight, but inside the mansion, Alexander Reed found himself thinking about a conversation he could not forget. For years, people had approached him with careful words and hidden intentions. They respected his position, his influence, and everything connected to his name. But Olivia Bennett had done something no one else had done in a long time. She had spoken to him like he was simply a person. When Olivia arrived for her next shift, she expected everything to return to normal. She prepared her medical notes, reviewed Alexander's schedule, and entered his office with the same calm professionalism she brought to every patient. She did not expect him to remember the smallest details from their conversation the night before. "You always ask people if they are comfortable before you help them," Alexander said. Olivia looked surprised. "Because everyone deserves to feel respected." The answer was simple, but it stayed with him. Alexander had spent years surrounded by people who measured everything through status and success. Olivia measured things differently. She noticed emotions before appearances. She noticed silence before words. As the days passed, Olivia began to understand the man behind the powerful image. Alexander was not the emotionless figure described in rumors. He was someone who carried every responsibility alone and rarely allowed anyone to see when he needed support. One afternoon, Olivia found him sitting in the library, surrounded by documents and unfinished work. The room was filled with warm afternoon light, but his expression showed exhaustion. "You have been working for hours," she said. Alexander looked up from the papers. "There is always something that needs to be done." Olivia placed a cup of tea beside him and smiled softly. "Maybe the world will continue turning even if you take one quiet moment for yourself." It was a sentence many people would have ignored, but Alexander listened. He realized Olivia was not trying to change him through criticism. She was simply reminding him that even strong people needed moments of peace. Outside the mansion, people began noticing small changes. The staff saw that Alexander started greeting them personally instead of walking past in silence. He began asking questions and listening to answers. These were small actions, but they revealed a side of him that few had ever witnessed. Olivia noticed the transformation but never took credit for it. She believed people changed because they chose to, not because someone forced them. One evening, as the two stood near the large windows overlooking the city, Alexander asked a question he had been carrying for days. "Why are you different from everyone else?" Olivia turned toward him with a thoughtful expression. "I am not different. I just believe people should be treated like people, no matter what they have or what others say about them." Alexander looked out at the city lights below. Those words felt heavier than any business advice he had ever received. For the first time, he wondered how much of his life had been spent protecting an image instead of living honestly. Olivia did not know it yet, but her kindness had reached a place inside Alexander that no amount of wealth or influence ever could. The man who once believed he had everything was beginning to discover that the most valuable things in life were never things at all. And in the quiet halls of the Reed estate, a connection built on trust slowly began to grow. The connection between Alexander Reed and Olivia Bennett continued to grow through the quiet moments that most people would never notice. There were no grand announcements, no dramatic promises, and no sudden changes that the outside world could easily see. Instead, something much deeper was happening inside the walls of the Reed estate. The man who had spent years keeping everyone at a distance was slowly learning what it felt like to trust someone. One evening, Olivia walked through the private library while organizing some of Alexander's medical records. The room was usually a place of silence, filled with shelves of books and carefully arranged documents. But that night, she noticed something unusual. A small wooden box rested on the corner of the desk, covered with years of dust. Alexander noticed where she was looking and became quiet. "That belongs to my past," he said softly. Olivia did not reach for it or ask questions. She simply respected the silence. Her reaction surprised him. Most people who discovered something personal about Alexander immediately searched for answers. Olivia did the opposite. She gave him the choice to share. After a few moments, Alexander opened the box himself. Inside were old photographs, handwritten letters, and memories from a time before he became known as one of the most powerful men in the city. Olivia looked carefully at the items, realizing there was a person behind the reputation she had heard about. "You were different back then," she said gently. Alexander looked at the photograph in his hand. "Maybe I was just less afraid of being myself." Those words revealed more than he intended. Olivia understood that the strongest walls were not always built from stone or steel. Sometimes they were created from disappointment, expectations, and years of protecting oneself from being hurt. She did not try to force him to explain everything. She simply stayed beside him and listened. For Alexander, that simple act meant more than he could express. The following days brought more small changes. Alexander began spending time outside his office. He joined conversations with the household staff instead of observing from a distance. He even started visiting the community programs his company supported, something he had previously left entirely to his employees. Olivia noticed that every change came from his own decision. She was not transforming him into someone else. She was reminding him of the person he had always been underneath the responsibilities and expectations. However, not everyone welcomed the changes. Victor Grant, a longtime rival in the business world, began hearing rumors about Alexander's new attitude. He noticed that the once distant and predictable man was becoming more open, more compassionate, and more connected to the people around him. Victor believed this change was a weakness. He did not understand that the same qualities he considered weaknesses were actually becoming Alexander's greatest strengths. One afternoon, Victor watched from a distance as Alexander thanked employees at a community event. The powerful figure who once seemed impossible to reach was now standing among ordinary people, listening to their stories. Victor quietly wondered what had caused such a transformation. He did not know the answer yet, but he knew one thing. Olivia Bennet had become someone important in Alexander Reed's world. Meanwhile, Olivia remained unaware of the attention surrounding her. She continued doing what she had always done, caring for others with patience and sincerity. She never tried to change Alexander's reputation or prove anything to anyone. She simply saw a person who needed understanding. And as the seasons began to change, Alexander realized something that would reshape his entire life. The one person who entered his world without asking for anything had become the person he trusted the most. Life inside the Reed estate slowly found a rhythm that no one had expected. Every morning began with the quiet sound of sunlight filling the wide hallways, fresh flowers appearing on polished tables, and the comforting feeling that the mansion had become more welcoming than it had been in years. Alexander Reed noticed those changes even though Olivia Bennet never claimed credit for them. She believed that kindness did not need recognition to have value. She simply cared for people in the same thoughtful way every single day. One afternoon, Alexander returned earlier than usual after visiting one of his company's community projects. Instead of walking directly into his office, he stopped in the kitchen where several employees were sharing lunch together. They immediately stood as he entered, expecting the usual formal conversation. Instead, Alexander smiled politely and thanked the staff for taking care of the estate while he had been away. The room became unexpectedly quiet. Many of them had worked there for years, yet they had never heard those simple words from him before. Olivia watched the moment from across the room without saying anything. She understood that genuine change was never announced with dramatic speeches. It appeared through small choices repeated consistently over time. Later that evening, Olivia prepared a light dinner and found Alexander reading near the fireplace. The large room was filled with warm golden light, creating a peaceful atmosphere that contrasted with the busy city outside the windows. She placed the tray beside him and noticed he had been staring at the flames instead of the documents resting on the table. "You are thinking about something," she said gently. Alexander smiled faintly. "I spent years believing that strength meant carrying everything alone." Olivia took a seat nearby, keeping enough distance to respect his space. "Sometimes strength means allowing someone to stand beside you," she replied. Alexander looked at her for several quiet seconds. "Does that ever become difficult for you?" Olivia answered honestly. "Every patient teaches me something different. Some people need medicine. Others need hope. A few only need someone willing to listen without judging them." Her words settled gently into the silence between them. Alexander realized she had never treated him as a powerful man or a frightening name. She had always treated him as someone deserving of compassion. The following weekend, Olivia convinced Alexander to visit the children's reading program his foundation quietly supported. Instead of arriving with an entourage or making a public appearance, he walked through the classrooms speaking naturally with teachers, parents, and students. He listened to their stories, asked thoughtful questions, and encouraged every child he met to believe in their own future. Watching from nearby, Olivia saw a version of Alexander that the public rarely witnessed. He laughed easily, listened patiently, and made every person feel important regardless of age or background. As they left the community center, Alexander paused outside the entrance while children waved goodbye. "I had forgotten what this felt like," he admitted softly. Olivia smiled. "You did not forget. You simply stopped giving yourself permission to experience it." Unknown to either of them, Victor Grant had been observing the event from across the street after hearing about Alexander's unexpected visit. The sight of the city's most influential man smiling among ordinary families unsettled him. He believed compassion would make Alexander vulnerable, and vulnerable people could be manipulated. Victor quietly walked away with a new plan forming in his mind. Meanwhile, Alexander and Olivia drove back toward the estate beneath the warm colors of the setting sun, completely unaware that the growing trust between them had begun attracting attention from someone determined to turn that trust into a dangerous advantage. The changes in Alexander Reed became impossible for people around him to ignore. The same man who once walked through every room with a distant expression was now taking time to notice the people who had always worked quietly beside him. The staff at the Reed estate began sharing stories about small moments they had witnessed, Alexander asking about their families, remembering important details, and showing appreciation without expecting anything in return. To Olivia Bennett, these moments were not surprising. She had seen the person behind the reputation from the very beginning. But to everyone else, it felt like they were discovering a completely different side of a man they thought they understood. However, not everyone viewed Alexander's transformation as something positive. Victor Grant watched from a distance as Alexander's priorities shifted. For years, Victor had understood Alexander as someone who valued control above everything else. A man who made decisions based only on strategy and success. But now, Alexander was listening to emotions, supporting community projects, and allowing people closer than ever before. Victor believed this change was a mistake. He saw compassion as a weakness instead of recognizing it as a strength. One evening, Victor arranged a private meeting with several business partners who had known Alexander for years. He spoke carefully, questioning whether Alexander's new choices would affect his reputation and influence. People change when they start caring too much, Victor said. And sometimes, emotions make people forget who they are. Meanwhile, Alexander had no idea that others were questioning his decisions. He was focused on something entirely different. He had invited Olivia to join him at a foundation planning meeting because he valued her perspective. At first, Olivia hesitated. She was not used to sitting in rooms filled with executives and important figures. "I am only a nurse," she said quietly. Alexander looked at her with a calm expression. "That is exactly why I want you there. You see things that others miss." Those words reminded Olivia of how different Alexander had become. The man she first met would never have admitted that someone else's opinion could matter so much. During the meeting, several executives discussed numbers, schedules, and future plans. Olivia listened carefully before offering a simple observation about the families they were trying to help. She explained that behind every statistic was a person with a story, a struggle, and a dream. The room became quiet. Her words shifted the entire conversation. Alexander watched as everyone began considering the human side of their decisions. After the meeting, he thanked her for speaking honestly. "You changed the direction of that conversation," he said. Olivia smiled. "No, I only reminded everyone why the work matters." That evening, Alexander stood near the large windows of his office looking over the city. He thought about how different his life felt compared to just a short time ago. He still had responsibilities. He still carried the weight of his position. But for the first time, he did not feel like he had to carry everything alone. Olivia had shown him that trust was not something to fear. It was something that made people stronger. Across the city, Victor received updates about the growing partnership between Alexander and Olivia. He realized that she was not simply an employee or someone passing through Alexander's life. She had become the person who influenced his choices more than anyone else. Victor looked at the information in silence, knowing that if he wanted to understand Alexander's new direction, he first had to understand the woman who had changed it. And while Alexander and Olivia continued building something meaningful together, they remained unaware that someone else was carefully watching every step they took. The days that followed brought a new sense of balance to Alexander Reed's life. The changes around him were no longer temporary moments of kindness. They had become part of who he was becoming. The people closest to him began noticing that the powerful man they had known for years was learning how to connect with others in a way they never expected. Yet Alexander still carried the weight of his past and the responsibility attached to his name. He understood that changing himself did not erase the challenges waiting around him. It simply meant he faced them differently. Olivia Bennett continued her work at the Reed estate, but her role in Alexander's life had quietly become something much deeper than professional care. She was the person who reminded him to slow down, listen carefully, and remember the value of ordinary moments. One afternoon, Alexander found Olivia in the estate garden speaking with several staff members. She was laughing softly while helping them organize a small community donation event. The scene caught his attention because it represented everything he had been missing for years. There was warmth, connection, and genuine happiness that could not be created through wealth or influence. As Olivia noticed him standing nearby, she smiled. "You look like you are thinking about something important," she said. Alexander looked around the garden before answering. I am realizing that I spent a long time building walls around myself. Olivia remained quiet, allowing him to continue. I thought those walls protected me, he said. But maybe they also kept good people away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The garden was filled only with the sound of leaves moving gently in the afternoon breeze. Olivia understood that this was not just a conversation about the past. It was Alexander finally accepting that trust was not a weakness. It was a choice. Meanwhile, Victor Grant continued gathering information about Alexander's transformation. He expected to find a hidden weakness, something that would prove Alexander had become careless. Instead, he discovered something that surprised him. Olivia was not distracting Alexander from his responsibilities. She was helping him become more thoughtful and more respected than before. This realization frustrated Victor because it challenged everything he believed about power. He believed people became stronger by becoming colder. Alexander was proving the opposite. That evening, Alexander invited Olivia to walk through the Foundation's newest community center before its official opening. The building was nearly complete, with bright classrooms, comfortable spaces for families, and areas designed to support young people. Olivia looked around with admiration. You created something that will help so many people, she said. Alexander shook his head gently. We created something. You showed me what it was supposed to become. Olivia looked at him with surprise. The Alexander she first met would have accepted all the credit without hesitation. Now, he was giving recognition away freely. As they stood inside the quiet building, Alexander admitted something he had never said before. For most of my life, I thought people stayed close because of what I could provide. Olivia looked at him carefully. And what do you think now? Alexander answered honestly. Now I believe the people who matter are the ones who stay when there is nothing to gain. The words carried a meaning neither of them ignored. But before the moment could continue, Alexander received a message that changed the atmosphere. There were new questions surrounding his business decisions, and someone was attempting to create doubt about the Foundation's work. Alexander looked at the message, then toward Olivia. For the first time, he did not think about handling everything alone. He thought about who he trusted beside him, and that realization showed him how much his life had already changed. The message on Alexander Reed's phone remained on the screen long after he had finished reading it. Someone had begun questioning the integrity of the Foundation, suggesting that its charitable work served only as a way to improve his public image. The accusations spread quietly through business circles, creating doubt where trust had only recently begun to grow. Alexander understood that reputations could take years to build and only moments to damage. Yet instead of reacting with anger, he remained calm. Olivia Bennett watched him place the phone on the table without saying a word. You already know who is behind this, she said softly. Alexander nodded. Victor Grant believes kindness makes people weak. Olivia looked at him with quiet confidence. Then he has never understood kindness. Those words stayed with Alexander throughout the following days. Rather than defending himself through interviews or public statements, he continued visiting the Foundation's programs exactly as planned. He attended literacy classes, spoke with volunteers, listened to parents, and encouraged students preparing for college. Cameras occasionally appeared, but Alexander never invited them. He behaved the same whether anyone was watching or not. Olivia noticed that consistency more than anything else. Genuine character did not change with an audience. One afternoon, the Foundation welcomed community leaders for an open house so they could observe every program firsthand. Teachers demonstrated educational activities, families shared personal experiences, and students proudly presented projects they had completed through scholarship opportunities. Alexander remained in the background, allowing everyone else to speak. Olivia moved naturally from one group to another, answering questions with honesty and warmth. During the event, an elderly teacher approached Olivia with a gentle smile. You are the reason he smiles now, she whispered kindly. Olivia looked surprised. No, she answered. He already carried that kindness inside him. He simply needed someone to remind him it was still there. Unbeknownst to them, Victor Grant stood quietly near the entrance, observing every interaction. He had expected to discover stage performances or carefully rehearsed speeches. Instead, he found authentic gratitude. Families thanked Alexander without being asked. Volunteers spoke about resources they had received months before anyone paid attention. Students described opportunities that had changed their futures. None of it appeared artificial. Victor slowly realized something uncomfortable. Alexander's influence was becoming stronger because people trusted him, not because they feared him. Later that evening, Alexander and Olivia walked through the nearly empty community center after the visitors had gone home. Sunlight faded through the large windows as the building settled into peaceful silence. Alexander stopped beside a wall covered with photographs of children, teachers, and volunteers smiling together. "I used to believe respect came from authority," he admitted quietly. Olivia looked at the photographs before answering. "Authority can earn obedience. Respect is something completely different." Alexander smiled thoughtfully. "You have been teaching me that from the very first day." Olivia laughed softly. "I never tried to teach you anything." "Maybe not," Alexander replied. "But you showed me what no one else ever could." As they prepared to leave, one of the young scholarship students ran back into the building after forgetting a backpack. The teenager thanked Alexander for believing in people who had never believed in themselves. Alexander watched the student disappear through the doorway before turning toward Olivia. At that moment, he understood that Victor could question his reputation, challenge his decisions, and spread as many doubts as he wished. None of those things could erase the lives that had already been changed. And for the first time in many years, Alexander no longer measured success by the size of his influence. He measured it by the number of people walking toward brighter futures because someone had chosen compassion over pride. The weeks following the Foundation's open house brought a new kind of attention to Alexander Reed and Olivia Bennett. The rumors that once questioned Alexander's intentions slowly began to disappear as more people saw the real impact of the work being done. Families continued sharing their stories, students received new opportunities, and volunteers remained committed to the mission they had built together. Yet for Alexander, the most meaningful changes were not the ones appearing in newspapers or public discussions. They were the quiet moments that reminded him how different his life had become. One evening, Alexander returned to the Reed estate after a long day of meetings. Instead of entering his office immediately, he walked through the garden where Olivia was sitting with a cup of tea, reviewing notes for the next community program. The peaceful setting felt completely different from the cold silence that once surrounded the mansion. "You always find a way to make this place feel alive," Alexander said. Olivia looked up and smiled. Maybe it was never the place that needed to change. Alexander understood what she meant. For years, he believed the emptiness around him came from the size of the mansion, the pressure of his responsibilities, or the challenges attached to his name. Now he realized the missing piece had always been connection. A few days later, Alexander invited Olivia to attend a special ceremony honoring the Foundation's volunteers. She hesitated when she saw the invitation. "Are you sure you want me there?" she asked. Alexander looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Why would I not?" Olivia lowered her eyes for a moment. "Because I know how people see me. I know where I came from." Alexander stepped closer, his voice calm and sincere. "I know exactly where you came from. That is why your perspective matters." Those words meant more to Olivia than he realized. She had spent years proving that her value was not defined by her job title or how others viewed her. She had always believed that every person deserved respect, regardless of their background. The evening of the ceremony arrived with warm lights, elegant decorations, and guests from across the community. Alexander stood among business leaders, teachers, and volunteers, but his attention remained on the people whose efforts had created real change. When he spoke, he did not talk about achievements or success. He spoke about gratitude. He thanked the nurses, teachers, workers, and families who had trusted the Foundation. Olivia watched from the audience, noticing how naturally he gave credit to others. The man who once carried every responsibility alone had learned the importance of standing beside people instead of above them. After the ceremony, Alexander and Olivia walked outside beneath the evening sky. The city lights reflected across the streets as they continued their conversation. "Do you ever regret staying?" Alexander asked quietly. Olivia looked at him with a thoughtful expression. "I stayed because I saw someone trying to become better. Not because of your name, your influence, or anything you could offer." Alexander looked away for a moment, allowing those words to settle. It was the answer he had always hoped existed, but never believed he would hear. Meanwhile, Victor Grant watched the growing respect surrounding Alexander from a distance. He realized that the connection between Alexander and Olivia was not a weakness he could exploit. It was the reason Alexander had become stronger. The very thing Victor misunderstood was the thing that made Alexander impossible to replace. As the night continued, Alexander and Olivia returned to the estate, unaware that their journey had already changed how the city viewed them. The powerful man who once believed he needed no one had discovered the value of trust. And the woman who entered his life as a caregiver had become the person who reminded him what it meant to truly live. The final months of the year brought a peaceful transformation to the Reed estate and everyone connected to the foundation. What had once been a place known only for wealth and distance had become a place where people gathered, shared stories, and created new opportunities together. Alexander Reed noticed the difference every morning when he looked out from his office window. The city below was the same. His responsibilities were still demanding, and his name still carried influence. But the man looking back at him in the reflection of the glass felt completely different from the person he used to be. He no longer measured his life by how much he controlled. He measured it by how much good he could create. Olivia Bennett continued to be a constant presence in that journey. She never asked for recognition, never searched for attention, and never tried to change Alexander into someone else. She simply reminded him that even the strongest people needed honesty, kindness, and someone willing to see beyond appearances. One afternoon, the foundation held the opening ceremony for a new educational center that would provide resources for families throughout the community. Teachers, students, volunteers, and local leaders gathered beneath a clear blue sky. Alexander stood near the entrance watching everyone arrive, but instead of stepping forward to receive praise, he welcomed people personally. He shook hands, listened to stories, and thanked every person who had helped bring the vision to life. When it was time for him to speak, Alexander looked across the crowd and paused. Years earlier, he would have prepared a speech focused on success, growth, and achievement. This time, he chose different words. I used to believe that strength meant never needing anyone, he said. I was wrong. Strength is knowing when to listen, when to learn, and when to appreciate the people who make your life better. The audience remained silent, not because they were surprised by his words, but because they understood how much they represented his personal journey. Olivia watched from the crowd with a quiet smile. She remembered the lonely man she first met inside a silent mansion, a man surrounded by everything except genuine connection. Now, he stood surrounded by people who respected him for reasons that had nothing to do with power. After the ceremony, Alexander and Olivia walked through the completed center together. The sound of children laughing filled the hallways, and sunlight passed through the large windows, creating a warm and welcoming atmosphere. Alexander stopped near a wall displaying photographs of the people who had helped build the foundation. Do you think I would have found this place without you? He asked. Olivia looked at the photographs before answering. I think you would have found it eventually. I was just there when you were ready to look. Alexander smiled because he knew she was right. Olivia had never saved him. She had simply shown him a part of himself he had forgotten. As evening approached, the two walked outside beneath the soft glow of the setting sun. The city that once saw Alexander only as a powerful figure now saw him as a person who chose compassion over pride. His reputation had changed, but more importantly, his heart had changed. The journey that began with a request from a lonely man ended with something far more valuable than anything he could purchase. It ended with trust, understanding, and a connection built on genuine care. And that was the lesson Alexander Reed carried with him forever. The greatest treasures in life are not the things we own, but the people who choose to stay because they truly see who we are.